All right, so welcome to everyone watching here today. Glad that you can join us, whether you're here at SCAC in person or you're watching online from somewhere else. We are so glad that you are here this morning. And so as we begin our time today, I just wanted to introduce myself. And so I am Pastor Aaron. I'm the English ministry pastor here at Scarborough Chinese Alliance Church. And we here at SCAC are just so grateful for the opportunity to be able to partner with our guest this morning, Alycia Wood, Enlighten, to bring you both the sermon that you saw this morning and also as well as our Q&A time and for today and also for next Sunday. And so what we hope to do with our time is to explore questions with you for all of you joining that you may have on the topic of God, on faith, on truth, or just about any other question you may have regarding Christianity. And so before we begin, just to introduce our guest, like I said, we'd like to welcome Alycia Wood of Lighten as our guest this morning to answer your questions. And so just some information about her. So Alycia was born and raised in Rochester, New York, currently residing in Atlanta. She graduated with a degree in criminal justice from Roberts Wesleyan College and later earned her master's degree in social justice from Marygrove College in Detroit, Michigan. Her personal interests include violin, piano, and ice hockey. Keeping in line with her passion for ministry, she has spent several years in both youth and prison ministries, humanitarian efforts, and most recently in apologetics ministry. This most recent endeavor has brought her to many universities, colleges, and retreats, as well as both public and private events globally. Alycia had previously spent 8 years doing apologetics ministry with the Ravi Zachariah International Ministry, RZIM, before joining Lighten. And Lighten was founded in October 2021, and they are a team committed to journeying with those looking to find answers to some of the hardest questions of life by considering Jesus, who claimed to be the light of the world. And if you're interested in that, more information about the Lighten Group can be found at lightengroup.org. So again, we are just excited to have this time with Alycia as she's here to answer your questions. And so wherever it is that you are joining us from, whether from the gym today or elsewhere, whatever faith background, we encourage you again to ask questions because this is ultimately what this time is all about. So ask questions that you may have, or perhaps you've been asked yourself, and hear what Alycia has to say. So if you have a problem or objection with Christianity, again, encourage you to ask it. If you do have questions, as you see on the screen here, you can submit your question in two ways. You can either send a text message to the number that's displayed here on the screen, and again, standard texting rates apply. Or you can also use the QR code, and if you're able to scan that with your phone, then you can fill out the form and ask your question there. And over the course of this next hour, we will try to get to as many of your questions as we can. And so before we begin with the first question, I'd just like to invite Alycia. Do you have any opening comments or remarks that you'd like to make before we get to the questions?
Sure. Thank you, first of all, everybody, for having me again. One of these days, we'll actually meet each other in person as opposed to having to do virtual. Both last year and this year, all of these changes that we've had the last several years have just made life so different. So really just thankful that you are willing to hear me speak again. And I'm really looking forward to your questions. I think one of the things that I really want to do with the talk this week and the talk next week, or wanted to do talk this week and next week, is just really help people to begin to think about their positions and their beliefs and where they're at. And are we believing things because we want them to be true or because they are? And I get that the implications for believing in something that is true, even if we don't want it to be, can really stink, because it's sometimes you might feel like, oh man, like I'm giving up so much, or things aren't going the way I want. But the advantage, of course, is that at least you were living in the right, not so much like unheard of territory, but you are on the track that you need to be on, because ultimately we all want truth. We want to know when somebody says they're our friend, that they really are a friend. And when somebody says I love you, they really mean I love you. Like, truth is how we function every day. And so hopefully between this week and next week, we can get through just a lot of just different thoughts you will have when it comes to God and Christianity, and just understanding belief in general.
All right, thank you, Alycia. Yeah, we are again looking forward to what will come. And so, without any further delay, and to give as much time as we can to all the questions that are coming in, why don't we just start things off with our first question this morning? And so, the first question today is the following. So, if science isn't the only way to know something, how else can someone come to be confident that God exists?
Okay, this is a really, really great question. And I think part of the challenge is in our society, we kind of almost pigeonholed ourselves into believing that the only way that we can know things is through science. So what science can tell us, we can understand. Whatever science can't tell us, we won't be able to understand. And so we kind of have this belief that this is going to be the direction that we need to go in for everything. And I think this is why it's important for us to understand that knowledge comes from a variety of sources. So science can do certain things. It can help us to understand certain things that are repeatable, certain things that we can test, certain things that we can conduct experiments on. And so science can give us a lot when it comes to those kind of things. But for much of our existence, we actually aren't getting our answers from science. So if I was to say to you, here's a particular recipe for you to cook, you're not looking to see if there's a scientific test that has been done on the recipe to see whether or not it's going to work. So let's say you want to make a certain kind of baked chicken or something like that, right? You get the recipe, and due to you read through the maybe the list of ingredients and the steps and directions, you're like, okay, this makes sense, this is going to work. And you go ahead and you make it. You don't necessarily say, I need to know whether or not there's any scientific studies that have been conducted to know whether or not this recipe is valid. In other words, sometimes when you know maybe the author of the recipe, you know that, oh, I can trust this particular thing because I trust this person. Maybe because of your knowledge of how what you need in order to make chicken, that this recipe seems to cover all of those bases. And maybe you even have experience of making something similar, but this one looks like it's better than maybe what you had before. So maybe like before you were close in what you were making, but now this one seems to have more information about what you need to do to get it just right. And so there's a variety of ways in which our everyday life, our knowledge isn't based on conducting experience. We just don't even have time for that even still. And so one of the things that when it comes to this idea of God, if we were to be able to prove God scientifically, my question is, what would that look like? So in other words, not if we were able to, if we wanted to prove God scientifically, my question is, what would that look like? Would we need God to appear, and then we would give him a DNA test to test his physical makeup? Because DNA is looking at physical, but God isn't a physical being, because matter, that physical attribute, matter was created. So God is actually of a different makeup than physical matter. He's a spiritual being. So how do we even test him? And even if he was physical that we could test him, how would we know this is God DNA and not alien DNA? Or that we have nothing to even compare it to. So we don't even have the ability to take the results of the test, the DNA test, and then say, oh, we know that this is God DNA because we know what God DNA must be like. Like, how do we even do it scientifically? And that's part of the challenge that we have there, is because we keep science in its lane is really great, and it brings us so many benefits, but to try and apply it to so many other things, we would be paralyzed. We couldn't even work. We couldn't make a recipe. We couldn't conduct some kind of meeting or some kind of plan that we have with our boss, or that we want to do at work, some kind of idea that we have that we want to construct, because we have to test it scientifically first to see if it'll work. So all that to say, we come on a regular basis daily to know and be confident that things exist, even apart from science, on a regular basis. So one quick illustration that I can use to maybe help make this make more sense. There's this interesting idea in child psychology called object permanence. So if any psychologists are listening, you're probably familiar with this. And what essentially this idea constructs is and it's hard, you can't necessarily prove everything when it comes to babies and infants. So but this is just an idea, is that the idea is that children construct an idea of the world around them based on things that they can see and hear and perceive and smell, etc. So children use their senses to be able to determine what actually exists. So in other words, when a child is, let's say, less than 4 months, they don't really necessarily have the ability to know that something exists that they can't see. So when mom leaves the room, mom is like gone from existence. Like, this is devastating. Like, mom is gone from existence. Oh, wait, she's back again. Oh, I can stop crying. I'm happy again. And so they don't understand that mom can exist in a certain way where I can't see her or I can't perceive her or sense her. And then over time, what happens is maybe you have like a toy and you present this toy to the child and they go to reach for it, but then you take the toy and you put it behind your back and they think the toy's gone, it disappears, and then they're upset. But then maybe if you show just a little bit of the toy from behind your back, they might start to realize, maybe there's more of the toy behind it. Even though I can only see a little bit of the toy, it's enough to let me know that there might be more of it behind her back. And over the course of time, you can take the toy, put it behind your back. The child knows it's there. They will eventually go and look for the toy because they're so confident that it's there. And then they can actually retrieve the toy. So by the time a child is, maybe 12 months, 18 months, they have this, what we call full object permanence, this idea that there are things that exist that even though I can't see them, I know that they exist because I've had clues of their existence before. And I think oftentimes we revert back and we say, unless I can see it and test it and experiment on it and touch it and feel it, it must not exist. But actually, normal childhood development tells us that things exist that we can't experience with our senses. So it's completely normal for us to believe in things that are not tangible with our senses, and that we maybe can't even test. So I think we look back at history, we look back at historical documentation of Jesus. We look back at people who knew him, see what they wrote. We look at historical documents of people who did not know him and see what he wrote. I think Jesus is key because of Jesus' claims of being truth and being the way to truth, and he is the way to God. So I think understanding what we think about Jesus is important. I think just understanding that we all have big questions in life. We all have big questions in life about how we got here. How do we live while we're here? How did the universe get so meticulously fine-tuned and built, not just for life, or not just to exist, but for our lives to exist in it? All of these things point to something bigger than us, because this cause that caused the universe, which science tells us has a beginning, we know it has a beginning, but science, this cause has to be outside of this universe, outside time, because it creates time and these kind of things. So I think we can be confident that God exists when we make a comprehensive case for the existence of God. Do you need 100% certainty? No, you don't need 100% certainty. Just like I was saying with the mother, right? You don't need to test your mother in order to know she's your mom. There's so many other things that have led you to that conclusion. And so I think looking at origins and fine tuning and making this comprehensive case, morality, Jesus, evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, credibility of the Bible, these things can help us feel confident that not just a God exists, but actually the God of Christianity.
Thank you, Alycia, for that response. Again, if you have questions, even if it's a follow-up to a question that she has answered, just feel free to send it our way and we will process it accordingly. I see a lot of questions coming in, and so I just encourage you all, again, to keep sending in your questions. So moving on, the second question that we have for you, Alycia, this morning, is this: it seems that Christians often believe that you can only be good if you believe in God. But I do many good things and don't believe in God. Why do Christians say that?
Okay, thank you. And yes, please, I would encourage you to send in your questions. And even if it's a question that's not related to the talk that I just gave, send it in anyways. It's okay. I'm okay for you to send in questions that aren't even pertaining to that specific talk, but any questions related to Christianity and God and the Bible. So yeah, this is it's true. For a lot of Christians think that you can only be, it's Christians who do good things, or you can only be good if you believe in God. And I just don't think that's fair. I think there's a lot of people in this world who do wonderful things, helping the sick, helping people with intellectual or physical disabilities, helping the poor and the hungry, helping the homeless, coming up with cures for diseases. And the list can go on. I mean, giving out money and all of these things. I think there's so many people who do so many good things, just kindness, cooking a meal for somebody who's sick. And I don't think that people need to believe in God in order to do those good things. I think part of the reason Christians say that is they might be getting two things confused. Is Christians get their source of morality from God himself. And so part of the idea is the thought that people might not, because if they don't know who God is, then how do you know how to do the good things that he tells us to do? And I think that might be a bit of a stretch, because I think each one of us as human beings that are created in the image of God, each one of us have the ability to desire God, to have a sense of moral right and wrong, to maybe have an outlook, a future outlook of hope or something bigger than us, to want meaning, these kind of things. In other words, there's certain attributes that I think we possess because we are reflections of the Creator, and we are people who are created by God. And so I think we all have the ability to kind of have this sense of moral right and wrong. And that's interesting, because why is it we if you were to go across this world, that people would find things that they believe are right and they find things they believe are wrong? They may not be in agreement. Somebody in one country might say something is right. Somebody in another country might say that same thing is wrong. So they might not agree on what's right and wrong, but they still have a sense that some things are right, some things are wrong. You'll encounter this even in a prison system, even amongst people who are spending time in prison. There are two things that if you get convicted of and sent to prison, you don't want to let people know that was your conviction. One is going to be if you, like a domestic abuse situation, with a wife, like if you're male and you or beat your wife or really physical with your wife. And the other thing is people who are molesting or abusive towards children. And you want to keep those, if you go to prison for those two things, you don't want to tell people, because the other inmates will attack you. Because even within the prison system of people who are convicted of crimes, they have a moral structure that these things are very heinous. And the idea is that you could get out and you could go harm my child or my spouse. And so it's really interesting that we find we can't escape these natural proclivities we have towards certain things being right, certain things being wrong. And I think that's one of the evidences, even referring back to the previous question, that something has wired us for what's right and wrong. And I hear people say things like, well, we're wired for what's right and wrong so that we can better survive and we can, do good for other people, and it's helpful for our society and these kind of things. But the problem is that even within a society, if we've evolved to believe certain things are right and wrong, that evolution has not been consistent. Because even within a society, there are people that think you should do these things to better our society, and other people within that same society that say you should do good things to better myself, not society. So even if we've evolved for some morality structure, that hasn't even evolved on a consistent place. So do we benefit society or do we benefit ourselves? And so it doesn't even seem like, from an evolutionary standpoint, that we can even solve the morality problem. This is why philosophers and all kind of people are trying to sort out what's right and wrong and these kind of things, because apart from a God who holds everybody, all humanity, to a certain standard, we are left trying to figure some of these things out on our own, and it becomes much more difficult. And so, yeah, I would say I think that we can do many good things. I think it's one of the hints that there is a God and that God exists. And I think that it helps us to know that why is it that humanity feels this way? I remember I was talking with a friend of mine who was an atheist at a particular university. And he said, I'm an atheist, and so I need to believe that morality is subjective. We're holding to certain moral standards today, but maybe 15 years from now, we can change those moral standards. And he's like, so I know I can't hold that there are absolute rights and wrongs, but I feel like rape is wrong. And I recognize that that's inconsistent with being an atheist, but I still feel like it's wrong. And I can't justify that or explain that or back that up. And I think he was being honest and fair and recognized that for him, certain things just seem objectively wrong, but you can't hold that view unless you think that there is a moral law that is given to humanity, given by somebody who creates or who is the author of morality. And so he recognized that inconsistency, didn't know how to put it together and rectify it with his atheism. But I think that it gives us some glimpses as to how we can understand how this desire we have to do right and wrong or good and bad might be pointing towards something bigger.
Thank you, Alycia. And again, keep the questions coming as I see more and more are being asked. And so the next question that we have as we continue on, so all the stories in the Bible seem so fictional. Where can I find the evidence that any of these things happened? One example is Noah's Ark.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of these things. Let me give you another one, actually, another one that people have asked, another story in the Bible people have asked evidence for, and that is the Exodus story. So this idea of Pharaoh and this Egyptian Pharaoh, and the Hebrews were slaves in Egypt for hundreds of years. Moses tells Pharaoh, you need to let these people go. Pharaoh refuses to. All of these things happen, bad things happen to Pharaoh and the Egyptians until finally they let them go. And the Hebrews leave, and the Egyptians change their mind and chase them into the wilderness, and the Egyptians end up dying. And then the Hebrews stay in the wilderness for 40 years wandering around. And one of the things people say is that seems like a massive thing within Egyptian history. Where is the evidence for that? Here is this Pharaoh who lost his battle, who died, who let the slaves go. And you should see evidence for that. You should see evidence of these people that are wandering around the desert. Why aren't we finding certain artifacts? So here's the interesting. I actually asked a friend of mine who was a PhD archaeology major at Oxford. She was an atheist. And I said to her, would we expect to find evidence of, these people wandering around the desert for 40 years? And she said, actually, you wouldn't. And she says, nomadic tribes tend to not have things that survive, number one. And number one, they don't have a lot of possessions. And so you actually wouldn't, this is an atheist archaeology PhD major, that you actually wouldn't expect to find evidence of these kind of nomadic tribes that are just in the wilderness that you could necessarily pinpoint to them. That was really enlightening for me, because I think we oftentimes think we need to find evidence of all these particular things in the Bible in order to believe they're true. So here's what I would say. I think there's a great organization called Biblical Archaeology Review, I believe is what it's called. The Biblical Archaeology Society. And their focus, as their name says, is on looking into the archaeology of the Bible. They have found so many things, evidence. First of all, a lot of the cities we definitely have names for. We have artifacts for that we found that back up some of the things that they're talked about within the biblical context. Once you get to the New Testament, it's much easier because we're talking about a much more recent period of time. We're talking 2,000 years ago versus 4,000 years ago. And you've got the Romans, and you've got their story and all of those things. And so we have Roman authors that talk about Jesus, or Jewish authors that talk about Jesus, as I mentioned. So we're going to have documentation that's going to be much easier when it comes to Rome. And some of the names of the people mentioned in the Bible are going to be found as Roman Caesars and emperors and this kind of thing. So all that to say, many of the things that did happen in the Old Testament, we actually do. So I would encourage anybody who looks for, wants to know what evidence can there be for these things that happen, to check out Biblical Archaeology Society. Just look on their website, or Biblical Archaeology Review, and you will be able to see tons of things that they have to help you with that. But in terms of Noah's Ark, people have claimed to have found pieces of the ship or those kind of thing in Mount Ararat in Turkey or different various places. I don't know, and I'm just not sure about whether or not any of that has ever been found to be completely solid, that they've actually confirmed, yes, this is the ark, versus we think that this is the ark. So, I mean, but that's the only evidence we would have from Noah's Ark, right? Obviously, the animals would have died, the people would have died. The only evidence we would have would be to see if any of the wooden ships survived. But you're talking about a story that happened thousands of years ago. And so even if pieces of the wood did survive, would they be intact enough for us to know that this was Noah's Ark? Or, so you're getting into, trying to find archaeological evidence for stuff that happened thousands of years ago where deterioration would have happened. So I would encourage you to look up Biblical Archaeology Society and Biblical Archaeology Review and see what else that they might have. But in terms of Noah's Ark, I think people have looked for that and trying to get evidence for that. And as far as I know, people have made certain claims. I just don't know if there's a consensus yet that is actually that there's confidence that would be Noah's Ark.
Yeah, thank you, Alycia. Yeah, and just to add to that as well, again, don't know the credibility of the source, but I do know, and I've seen a lot of documentaries made of expeditions of those trying to find Noah's Ark and claiming to have found Noah's Ark. So I know National Geographic, I think has done one, and I've seen one on the Discovery Channel as well. And so all to say, like, there are things like that out there, to, like, even for you to be able to watch, just to get an idea of like what people are claiming to have found. But yeah, as we move on, the next question that we have this morning. So when sharing the gospel, I have been asked, if God is good, why does he let natural disasters happen? How would you respond to that?
Sure. And I understand that. I mean, I recently watched a film on the tsunami that happened in Asia. Oh, I mean, it's just heart-wrenching to just look at some of these natural disasters that people go through. This is in America right now. It's hurricane season. Most of you Canadians, I don't think, have to worry about that quite as much because they probably don't make it your way, which is wonderful. Trust me, I'd rather have snow than a hurricane. Okay, so enjoy the snow. Be grateful for the snow. Being from New York and moving into the South, I'm like, hurricanes, what am I supposed to do with this? Give me the snow, take me back to New York, But either way, hurricanes come through. And season, I think, is April to September, I think, is hurricane season. So, I mean, you never know when one's going to come through and destroy this thing or that thing, or earthquakes in California or various places throughout the world. So all that to say, yeah, I understand this question. Like, this is sad. And first of all, let me just say that there's no answer I would want to give you that's going to make you say, oh, natural disasters don't bother me anymore. I'm okay when people die as a result of an earthquake or a tornado or a tsunami or whatever, or a landslide or an avalanche. Like, I'm okay. I don't ever want to give anybody an answer that makes them feel that it's okay that people went through this kind of suffering, went through this kind of pain. So if you are looking for some kind of answer that will somehow make you feel less, I don't know, just less sad about the pain and suffering that people feel, I will not give that answer. And I don't want you to ever have an answer that makes you not grieve over these kind of things. You always want to grieve over these things. And anybody who gives you an answer that somehow makes the pain go away, I would totally reject that answer, because these things are not okay, or they're really sad. So let me just say this. For me, the question is more of, how could God, as it's phrased, be good and not prevent these things? How could he be good and let these things happen to people? But inherent in this question is a very unique to Judeo-Christian perspective, which is that humans are image bearers of God. In other words, humans have value and they have worth. In other words, nobody's ever asked me this question: why did God let a hurricane hit an abandoned island and kill millions of ants? Nobody's asked me that question. People ask this question when it affects people. No one, if there is a tidal wave in an island somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, it's probably not going to make much news, if any news. People don't care unless human life is lost. But if there is no God, then human life is irrelevant anyways, in the sense that humans are just cells. They're just DNA propagating machines, just like everything else, just like the animal world, a blade of grass, the trees, and a tomato plant. Like, there's nothing unique or special about humans within a naturalistic, atheistic framework. And so in order for this to be a violation of some sort, we would need to see it happen against a human that has value. But in order for a human to have value, you're borrowing ideas from Christianity, which says that humans have value. And so the reality is that just want to point that out, that in order to even find a problem with natural disasters and humanity, you have to have a recognition or an acknowledgement that humans are valuable. But you're not going to get that unless you have some sort of God being that gives value to humans. Now, with that said, I think that there are lots of things that God allows that are painful in our lives. Natural disasters is one of the many things that God allows. I think God allows people to get cancer at 5 and pass away. God allows people to be hurting. God allows people to fall and break a leg and be in pain. God allows people to get sick. He allows people to not have money. He allows, the list goes on. The list goes on. And the reality is that God makes a world in which the world itself is affected and impacted by humanity's broken relationship with God. In other words, when God first creates Adam and Eve, he creates humans that are in close relation with him. The minute they disobey him is the minute it severs that relationship. And as a result, it didn't just sever the relationship between humans and God, that their decision affected the world around them. And you see animals that are suffering, you see all kind of things that are happening, and humans are now living in a world where that nature even works against them, it seems like at some point. The same nature that feeds them is the same nature that often takes life. And so God creates humans in a world in which they can freely live, freely choose God, but as a result of their choice, it caused damage to the world around him. So we could ask the question, if God is good, why did he give humans free choice? Because their free choice to disobey God caused so many massive problems with the world that we have around internally, in terms of viruses that help us hurt us now, bacteria helps us, but it can also hurt us. The natural world helps us, but also hurts us. We see this breakage everywhere. So God could have created a world in which people weren't free, but then we would never know love, because love is a choice. Love of each other and love of God. And so I think that one of the things that we need to keep in mind is that if God is good, he's going to create a world that has good things in it. But some of those good things many of those good things have been twisted and no longer are helpful for us or as beneficial for us as we wish that they were. And I think the Christian message is ultimately not that things will be great here, but one day things will be fixed. One day God will create a new heavens and new earth where there won't be any more disasters that are taking life, won't be any more cancers, and won't be any more tears. So I think I would let somebody know that's asking me this question if I'm sharing the gospel. Number one, unless you believe humans have value, you're not going to have an issue. You should not have an issue with a natural disaster wiping out somebody. But if you are grieved by that because you think humans have value, then you need to ask yourself where you're getting that sense of value from, because atheism doesn't give you that. And if you think that humans have a sense of value, then you might find yourself more in line with the Christian worldview than your atheistic worldview would allow you to hold.
Thank you, Alycia, for that answer. This next question, I guess, is a bit more of a personal question for you as
Okay.
well. And so the question is, to me, it seems like the evidence for and against a God seems to be the same and more of a personal preference of what you choose to believe. What tipped you to choose Christianity as the absolute truth?
I like this. I like this. That's a good question. Whoever asked this question. Seems like the evidence for and against a God seems to be the same and more of a personal preference. So there's a lot in that, because I would almost wonder if this is why I'm saying this, is because when I ask somebody who does not believe in God, who's an atheist, what is your evidence for atheism? They tell me I don't have to have any, or I have none. I'm just denying your belief and your claim in Christianity. In other words, I have not really been presented with evidence against the existence of God. People will give me argumentation against what I believe about Christianity, and they will challenge my Christian views. But to have somebody actually lay out a case, what is their scientific evidence that God does not exist? I've not been able to get anybody to answer that question for me. And so for me, it's almost like the scale is slightly different, where the evidence for God has a lot of things, and the evidence against God is zero. And I've asked people to please, what is your evidence against God? Help me to know what this is. But all they do is attack Christianity. But that doesn't help me understand the evidence against God. You can disprove Christianity, and it doesn't mean God doesn't exist. It just means Christianity isn't true. But God could still exist. The God of Islam could be the God. It could be Jehovah's Witness faith. It could be the Mormon. It could be the millions and millions of Hindu gods. Disproving Christianity does not make the case for God. That case needs to stand on itself. Disproving Christianity doesn't make the case against God. That needs to stand on its own. And I actually haven't been able to have anybody give me a solid case against God. So feel free, if you want to chime in and throw another question in there. I would love to hear it genuinely, because I've asked this question multiple times. People, what is your evidence that there is no God? And they just say, we don't have any, and we don't need to give you any, because we just deny your belief. So with that said, what tipped me to choose Christianity as the absolute truth? Yeah, I think that's fair, because I would say I don't think it's going to be the same for everybody. I think I was a criminal justice major. Give me the evidence. That's me. I want the evidence. I want to see where it leads. And I think my journey in the beginning, when I was a child, was just like, oh, this is what we believe. This is what we do. I was a child. As I got older and I really had to think and understand it more for myself, I began to question Christianity. I really doubted Christianity. I got to one point where I'm like, there is no God. There's no way this Christianity thing is true. But I had certain things happen in my life that gave me, that let me know that somebody was hearing me. Something was there. If Christianity wasn't true, something else was, because they were hearing me. And so I think for me, what took me to choose Christianity is a combination of experience and also evidence, and also seeing miracles. There is a miracle. I know of a woman who was paralyzed for 20 some odd years with a traumatic brain injury. She was in a car accident, caused traumatic brain injury, left her paralyzed. She actually was from Buffalo, New York, so right over the pond from where you guys are, just like Rochester is as well. And a Christian woman, amazing singer. Her name is Delia, and Delia Knox, Knox, and she traveled around the world singing in her wheelchair. I saw her in a wheelchair. And one particular time, she's at a church service and people are praying for her, and she gets up and she walks. They were praying for her to walk. She got up and walked and was moving her legs. And a few weeks later, one of her dreams was to go back to Buffalo and walk up the stairs to her parents' house, because she had not been able to do that in 20 years. And the Buffalo News showed up, and the local Buffalo News showed up, and she got out of the SUV that she was in with these big, huge stiletto heels, and walked up the stairs to her parents' house, and her parents were at the top, and they were crying, and they were just devastated, or just overwhelmed with like, oh my goodness, they'd prayed for this so many years. So I've seen evidence of miracles. I've had personal experiences where I've prayed for certain things to happen, and they have happened. And that has, and only God knew that I needed those particular things. So I prayed it for him. And I think the evidence has led me to Christianity, beyond just, the idea that we have, that there's origins to the universe, and there's morality, and that there's meaning, search for meaning, and there's the fine tuning of the universe. Beyond that, which is just kind of a general, there might be something more God thing. The specific evidence surrounding Jesus Christ is just extreme. We know he existed. The question is not whether he existed. The question is always, who was he? And the fact that today is June 5th is because that man walked the earth, and his impact was so great that it changed our time, like our clocks and our calendar system. Like, there is something to him. And I think we all actually need to look into Jesus, because even Christianity tells you, look, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, this whole Christianity thing is silly and it's a wash. We need to look into Jesus. And I think the evidence surrounding the resurrection is so huge. The fact that so many things that are written about in the Bible are found outside the Bible helps give me historical foundation and credibility to the biblical text. And so I think it's a range of things. I don't think my faith in God or my belief in God hangs on one particular thing. I think it's on several things combined: miracles, also personal experience I've had with God, and also the evidence for the Christian faith. Thank you for that question. That was so good. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alycia, for that response. And related to that, I guess, is this following question. So truth can be hard to figure out. How can I begin on the path to discovering it? What do I do if what seems to be true is contrary to what I wish was true?
Yes, truth can be very hard to figure out. Very, very hard to figure out. And I think we begin on the path to discovering it by starting to journey on the path. So let me give an example. Let's say I had a friend who was, let's say, a chemist, and they loved chemistry. They loved looking at atoms and molecules and these kind of things. And one day, I'm in their lab, and let's just say this stuff is boring to me, and I don't care anything about this. One day I'm in their lab, and they're like, Alycia, they're telling me all of these cool things about how the inner workings of a cell works, and the endoplasmic reticulum, and the transfer RNA, and all these kind of things. And I'm like, huh? Like, I don't even understand what you're talking about. And I'm really bored with what they're saying. And they say, okay, you know what? Come over to the microscope. Let me show you something. So just to give them another shot, even though I'm already bored with their conversation and I don't find anything cool about this inner workings of a cell, I go over to the microscope, and they say, go ahead and look. And I put my eye in and I look, and I see, I can start to see things move, things I didn't know before. And I got to watch things happen. And all of a sudden I'm like, like I gasped back from the microscope, and I'm like, this is actually pretty cool. What changed? Those things existed before, but what changed between when I was bored and my friend was describing it and when I was able to put my eye in the microscope and look and see it is what changed is I was willing to look. I was willing to say, you know what, this stuff sounds boring, but I'm willing to try the journey and see where it goes. And G.K. Chesterton once said, and I hope I don't mess up this quote, he said, it's not that Christianity has been tried and found wanting. It's that it has been found wanting. It hasn't been found wanting, left untried. See, I just butchered it. I don't know. But the point is, his point is saying, look, the issue is not that Christianity lacks information, truth, relevance, reason. It's that it has been left untried. In other words, people aren't willing to try it. And just like me going up to this microscope and having this experience, I was willing to try it. How does that child, we talked about object permanence before, how does that child begin to know that that object is behind mom's back, even though they can't see the object at all? Is they're willing to go around her back and look. I think we need to be willing to embark on the journey. And oftentimes people say, I don't care about this God thing, it's irrelevant to my life. And they just go on about their lives. But we're talking about something big here, guys. We are talking about truth. We're talking about something that impacts your life and has the ability to impact your life in a significant way. And so sometimes what is true is contrary to what we wish was true, right? We go to the doctor, they say, hey, you have this infection, not what we want it to be true. But we would rather know the truth so then we can then respond, as opposed to the doctor saying, oh, you have a cold, when really you have double pneumonia or you have meningitis. I don't want you to tell me what's going to make me feel good or feel me less scared by telling me I have a cold. I want you to tell me what I actually have so I can then be given the ability to respond to it. And so in our everyday life, we don't really want to live what we wish is true. We want the truth so that we know how to function. So I would say, get on the journey. And if something seems to be contrary to what we wish were true, if it still is true, give yourself the ability to consider, even though you don't wish it was true now, give yourself the ability to consider, well, what would this mean for my life? Would this really be so bad if this was true? Would this really be a problem if this was true? Why don't I want it to be true? Is the issue with me? And things like that. So I would say, join the journey and allow yourself to be open to what you find.
Thank you, Alycia. And just before we ask the next question, actually just going back in part to the example that you gave from the previous question. And so one of our behind the scenes tech people actually found the link to the story that you were referencing. And so hopefully you can see this if I just share this right now. So this is in the Buffalo News. The article to the story that you were referring to, Woman Celebrates Miracle, Buffalo native injured in 87 crash, says she regained ability to walk at a revival meeting. And so just, yeah, if any of you are curious to actually see and, proof that Alycia isn't just making this up when she tells us these stories, you can actually just Google Buffalo News. And then, Woman Celebrates Miracle, and I'm sure you can find this story yourself as well.
Can I just add on to that real quick? First of all, great job, tech team. That was quick and well done. Also, guys, you can see the video on YouTube. So they were actually filming this whole prayer service when she was in a wheelchair and they're praying for her and she tries to get up and she falls down, she can't, and eventually she's able to get up and walk. That is actually on YouTube. If you look Delia Knox walking, I believe is what it is, you'll see that video. You'll even probably be able to find video of her walking home and the Buffalo News being there. So you can actually watch it yourself as well. So thank you, tech team, because that reminded me, I should tell you about the YouTube clip as well.
Thank you. Yes, that's something definitely we should look into afterwards as well. Yeah, so the next question that we have goes like this. So some of the metaphors you use seem very incomparable to the larger scale of things. The logic that science doesn't prove everything shouldn't always take away our desire to prove things scientifically. How can we justify using metaphors that do not fully capture the significance of creation? I don't know if that question.
Sure. I'm not exactly sure what they're asking here, but let me start with the first part. Some of the metaphors seem very incomparable to larger scale of things. The logic that science doesn't prove everything shouldn't take away our desire to prove things scientifically. Absolutely right. I agree. Let's do science and science and science, and let's love it. And let's learn what science can teach us. Let's continue to see what we can prove, what we can understand, what we can learn. I agree. We should, just because we can't use it to prove a lot of things, or just because we can't prove it to use it to understand a lot of things, does not mean we shouldn't do it. So yes, I fully agree that we should be doing science as much as possible. My whole point was just to say it's not the only way, which I think this question does understand. It's not the only way for us to know things. That's all I'm getting at. It's not the only way. If we can scientifically build a case for God, cool. I'm just saying science by its definition is limited and that it can't test everything. And because it's got to be repeatable. And so they just can't do that. So what we have used science for, though, when it comes to specifically Christianity, is we use science to do dating on manuscripts that we find. So to know, like, are these authentic manuscripts? Are these older manuscripts? So there's a lot of things that we want to research whenever we find a manuscript. Is this authentic or is this a forgery? And these kind of things. Science can help us there, because science is able to run experiments and it has the physical manuscript in front of it and those kind of things. So science can be helpful in regards to that. Science can also let us know whether or not a miracle is even a miracle, in the sense of this particular thing with Delia Knox. We know medically she was paralyzed. We're able to test those things. The traumatic brain injury, there's evidence of that. But now it doesn't seem things are better. There's ways that we could potentially scientifically even look at some of those things. Science may not answer us how it happened, but it can tell us that it did happen. And so there are ways that we can use science when it comes to Christianity. So how can we justify using metaphors that do not fully capture the significance of creation? I'm not sure exactly what that particular part is asking. So if you want to write in and put a clarification, that's fine. But I would just say this: in general metaphors are ways of giving us examples and making comparisons and things like that. And that's why we have to use so many metaphors when speaking, because no metaphor encompasses everything. there's always limitations with particular metaphors. So it is not going to capture, a metaphor is not going to capture the full weight of creation. I think creation and nature is amazing. If you could see my deck right now, you'd see I'm growing tomatoes, and I'm growing bell peppers, and I'm growing basil, and I'm growing peas and kale. And I'm like, nature feeds me. Like, creation is beautiful, and it feeds us and it cares for us. And I think ultimately as well, creation, the life cycle of creation, of things becoming new, of the fact that it's so intricate and it's so beautiful and it's so interconnected. I mean, we're learning so much now about how we think plants can hear, which is crazy, because they can't figure out, because they're like, plants don't have like they don't have a brain like we do. They don't have a neurological system, yet it seems like they can hear. They run experiments where you tell a particular plant every day, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, you're nothing, these kind of things. And you tell another plant, oh, you're so wonderful, you're so great, and you talk nicely to it, that the plants will grow differently. I mean, it's just wild, some of the things we're finding out. So I would just say, I don't think there's any metaphor that can fully capture the significance of creation, but I think we should do as much science as we can to help us to know we can know.
Yeah, as I'm reading this question, I guess I can attempt to maybe ask it in what I think that the questioner is. So I think what they're trying to ask is, if science isn't the only way, and then so we've been using these other metaphors, but then, like, can we justify using these metaphors if they're not, fully capturing just the significance of, I guess in this case, creation. So like, are these metaphors a good way, like, to give evidence if they themselves don't capture the brevity of what it is that we're trying to describe? Maybe that was what.
Yeah, and I guess I'd love to know maybe which specific metaphor was troubling. But I guess I think the thing that I would then just kind of repeat then maybe is just to say that our metaphors are always limited, but we use them all the time. We use examples. We'll be talking, we'll say, for example, right, to give people a glimpse. And so I think that I would definitely not say a metaphor can ever fully capture the magnitude of creation. I think there's so much to it to just pin it down to one particular metaphor. But I think the overall point of I'm assuming that they're talking about when I say that science is not the only way to believe in things. It's point that I'm assuming that they're referring to, and that we don't DNA test our moms. And so I'm just trying to show that that the only way to believe isn't done just through science. And so if that at least point comes across, and I think that would be what's going to be really key, is science is not our only way to knowledge. It is one of our ways, and we should do it and we should use it. But science can tell us like we talk about limits. I think I talk about how science can't tell us which woman is prettier than another, and science can't tell us what we ought to do more morally. And so I think any metaphor is not trying to capture the full significance, but just trying to help us understand what place something should actually be in terms of science.
Yeah, thank you, Alycia. So I think we have time for maybe two more questions
Okay,
before we wrap things up. And so this next one here is in a way similar to this previous question. If God is the ultimate truth, what is the problem with scientifically questioning him?
great. Yeah, so I don't think there's any problem scientifically questioning God. I just don't think science has the ability to do it because of the way the science is structured, right? So science number one is only going to test the natural world. So it can't test the supernatural. So science can question God, but science doesn't really do that. Science isn't just like science isn't a person. Like it's not that it's not that you can't question God. It's that you can't use you can't. How can science raise questions about something that is outside of the realm of science? So we're talking about a supernatural being. Science raises questions and challenges within the natural physical world. It is unable to do that about a supernatural, a non-physical being, a spiritual kind of being. So we can't scientifically question something that's outside of the realm of what science can question and answer and test. And that's kind of the difference. So science can tell me how to make tea or how to make a meal, let's go back to chicken. We're making chicken, what seasonings are in there. It can tell me the molecular makeup of the chicken. It can tell me the pH levels and all the different ingredients, and it can break it down to a very, very minute scale. Science, if I put arson in the meal and poison it, science can test the arson. It can find out if it's in there, can find the quantity of quantity of arson in there. Science can tell me the effect the arson is going to have on people if they eat that meal. So science can deal with all of the natural physical aspects of that meal. But what science can't do is tell me whether or not I should feed it to the guests that are coming to my house for dinner tonight. That's what science can't do. So it can tell me all the physical makeup. It can test all the physical parts of this meal, but it can't tell me whether or not I should give it to other people because it has no way of testing that. So the problem with scientifically questioning God is not that we're using science to question God or that there's something wrong with science challenging God. It's just that science itself doesn't possess the ability to make moral statements, to make ethical statements, to test the supernatural and these kind of things. So I think we need to go to that's why we have other fields, right? One of the biggest atheists today is a guy named Daniel Dennett. He's one of the four horsemen of atheism. He's not even a scientist. You know, got Richard Dawkins, who was a scientist. You have Sam Harris, who does, I think he's neuroscience. I might be wrong, but I think he's something along those lines. You had Christopher Hitchens, who was a journalist. And then you had Daniel Dennett, who was a philosopher. These are the four big henchmen or horsemen of atheism. They're not all scientists. They can be atheists because their philosophically, they found issues with God. And so I think we bring in all of the different fields to make our case for or against God, but we don't limit it to just one.
Well, thank you, Alycia, for that response. And so we'll just ask one more question. And so this is a little bit unrelated to anything that you've shared about so far, and so hopefully it doesn't doesn't throw you off.
Okay.
But our final question for today is this: so after someone we love passes away, will they still be able to hear us if we speak to them? Also, if a dog passes away, can they go to heaven?
Okay. So I actually think on my podcast, I have a podcast I do with a couple of my colleagues. It's called Where We Begin. And you can find it on our website or an Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcast from. But I think we actually addressed this question about, do animals go to heaven? Do all dogs go to heaven, right? These kind of things. And look, here's the thing. The Bible doesn't necessarily tell us for sure whether or not your particular animal will be there. and what exactly happens, but it does let us know that there is an aspect of animals within this idea of a future new heaven and a future new earth. So we were created with animals. We were created with plants and trees and other things. We weren't just created to be alone with God. This idea of him creating a world where there won't be any more pain and suffering, where things will be right again, will be good again. It seems to me that there would be animals there as well. And the Bible does talk about this idea of animals being there as well. But will it be your particular dog? That I don't know. I don't know. And do people still hear us if we speak to them? I'm not sure about this one. I don't think it can hurt you if you just want to say, "Hi, Mom, I hope you're doing okay," or "Hi, Mom, I miss you," or "Hi, Mom, I love you." I mean, but do they necessarily hear us? I don't know. There are times in the New Testament where, Jesus is interacting. He interacts with someone who has gone away, and the afterlife is not pleasurable for him, and he wants to come back, and he wants to tell his family, "I want to tell you about what I've experienced, tell you about what's going on, so so you can change your life." So Jesus does seem to be interacting with this particular person in the afterlife. But does that necessarily mean that we are doing that we have the ability to do that, or that they actually have the ability to hear us regularly? Was that a unique situation? Was that a one-time situation? Was that just a Jesus only situation? Some of these things, we just don't know. So, I mean, I don't, if you still just want to say, "Mom, I love you, and I care about you, and I miss you," I mean, or Dad, or whatever. I mean, I don't really think that there's harm in that. And if they don't hear us, okay. But if they do, then okay. But I'm not necessarily convinced right now of either way. So I don't want to land on a side either way on probably either one of those questions. So those are good ones to think through.
All right, thank you again, Alycia, for taking the time with us this morning to answer all these questions. We covered a lot of different questions, and I'll just say as well, even though our session today is coming to an end, Alycia will be joining us again next Sunday as well. And so if you did ask a question that did not appear or get answered today, we will keep the list of questions that we have as well, and try to include them next week for Alycia. And so even through this week, if you won't think of a question midweek, again, just ask it, text it, and we will queue it for the coming Sunday. And so again, just a few notes before we wrap up. If you did miss our service this morning, or you want to rewatch the message that Alycia gave, both the service and also the Q&A session will be available on our church's YouTube channel, so at Scarborough Chinese Alliance Church, and you can just find the service under the English Ministry section. So next week, again, our series continues, Why Should I Care If God Exists? And as we will for the rest of the month of June. And so join us next week at 9:30 a.m. for Sunday service as Alycia joins us again. Next week, speaking to the issue of how do my beliefs impact my life? And as for the entire month, the service will be followed by a Q&A session at 11:15 a.m. And so again, if you didn't get your question answered, or if you have more questions, feel free to keep asking, and we will pick this up next Sunday as well. And finally, just a reminder that after Alycia next Sunday, that Abdu Murray will join us June 19th in person, and so that's Father's Day. And so Abdu will speak on the faith of science, the interaction of faith and science, showing through science that belief in God, specifically the God of the Bible, makes the most sense. And then June 26th, Abdu Murray will join us through video again. And so, is faith the enemy of equality? Speaking to the hot button issue of our day, specifically race and gender, and how the Bible justifies our desire for equality, but a naturalistic worldview cannot. And finally, also, Abdu Murray, when he is here with us, the weekend of June 18th, 19th, he will also speak at a special session on Saturday, June the 18th at 7 p.m. at our SCAC Gormley campus as well. And that will be a different message than what he shares on Sunday. And so on June the 18th, he will share Finding Clarity in a Culture of confusion. And that session will also be followed by a live in-person Q&A with Abdu Murray as well. And on the June 19th, when he is here with us at the main campus, he will also do the Q&A live in person as well. And so again, admission is free for the June 18th, and childcare is provided. However, if you do need childcare for June 18th, please see the details on our website and register for the childcare on our website, just so we know how many children we're expecting. So again, thank you to all of you joining us today, wherever it is that you are, whether here at church or elsewhere. And again, for the remainder of the month, I encourage you to keep coming back, to invite your friends to join, and whether in person or watching online, to definitely participate and ask questions. And so once again, Alycia, I'd like to thank you so much for your time today, and we look forward to having you join us again next
Yeah.
Sunday.
Thank you. Look forward to seeing you all. Thank you so much for your questions and your time today, guys. Look forward to talking to you again next week.
So thank you all. And so we hope to see you again when we pick this up next week on Sunday. God bless.